5 museums a World Heritage Site. Thousands of years of cultural history. Millions make a pilgrimage each year to Berlin's Museum Island. But who built it? For what purpose? And where do the treasures come from? Enough material for a thrilling TV crime series. But here's the short version. It all began in 1825 with the construction of the Altes Museum. A mad endeavour, building on an island. The marshy ground is anything but stable, but the location is symbolic. On one side, the royal palace, seat of the Prussian government. Next to it, the cathedral, symbol of church power. Across from it, the military. And now, culture will also get its place.
These were sort of the pillars on which the Prussian state stood. This area here was actually quite damp. You can still see it. We're on an island surrounded by water. Even when the Altes Museum was being built, they had these problems, and back then they laid down a wooden framework, a technique that had already been tried and tested.
3,000 giant wooden piles were driven into the ground as a foundation for the Altes Museum. It opened in 1830. For the first time, the royal collections, primarily ancient sculptures, were on show to the public. Wilhelm von Humboldt's vision was that culture would now become part of a person's complete education.
The extraordinary idea of the Museum Island was the generosity of scale, that you would be able to walk from one culture to the other, and the fact that it was declared from the beginning as a place for art and scholarship and learning. And the generosity and the academic integrity of that intention was very, very remarkable.
It would take a century for Museum Island to be completed. But why were so many museums needed? And where did the exhibits come from? In London, the British Museum opened in 1759. Initially, it was a hodgepodge of antiquities, fossils and specimens, the donation of a private collector. But even back then, what were known as the Elgin marbles, actually parts of the Parthenon frieze from Athens, caused a big sensation. 30 years later, Paris followed with the Louvre. The Museum of Fine Arts continues to shine today with the Mona Lisa. Prussia wanted to keep up in this race. King Friedrich Wilhelm III also aimed to showcase his own power and grandeur.
And whether we're talking about paintings or antiquities, the three cities are in constant competition. Berlin really takes off around 1900. The great antiquities from Pergamon, from Babylon. There's nothing in London or in Paris to match those. The competition swung in archaeology very strongly towards in favor of Berlin.
German archaeologists were gripped by excavation fever. Everything was considered important for understanding the development of so-called high civilizations. Expeditions went to the Middle East, Egypt, Greece and Asia Minor. There, in Pergamon, engineer Karl Humann stumbled upon parts of a giant altar in 1878. He managed to stop the local practice of grinding the marble blocks into lime. Despite rules which only allowed a portion of finds to be exported, he succeeded in bringing almost the entire altar to Museum Island. A special deal with the Ottoman Empire allowed Berlin to secure the altar and permits for further excavations.
The Ottoman Empire at the time was in economic difficulties. Some historians talk about a period of decline. And therefore, they were looking for partners. And Prussia then became one of these partners. And one can't really see the history of excavations by the Germans without also seeing this colonial context, which was not formal colonialism, but it was an informal form of imperialism that led the Ottoman Empire to be dependent on Prussia. It might have been legal at the time, but then the question is Is it moral from today's point of view?
That's often a current criticism from today's perspective. Of course, we have to understand it in its historical context. The Pergamon altar was quite simply saved. It would have ended up in the lime kiln otherwise, and that's the case with many objects. The goal was to have their value acknowledged and have them appreciated in the first place.
In 1930, the altar could be admired in all its glory in the newly opened Pergamon Museum. But it soon became apparent even Museum Island was not a safe haven for the ancient treasures. With the advent of World War II, Museum Island, in the centre of Berlin, inevitably suffered collateral damage. Before the war, efforts had been made to protect the biggest exhibits. Anything transportable was moved to safety, often outside Berlin. But the buildings suffered massive devastation, and the collections were torn apart. The stories are dramatic.
First came the Americans, then the British, then the Russians. Everyone took their share. Some went to the Western Allies and was later gathered in Darmstadt. A large part stayed here but was taken by the Russians. After the war, there was practically nothing left. Even the large objects were gone. Everything had been taken to Russia. What was left were empty museums.
In the mid-1950s, Russia returned part of the looted art to Museum Island, which was then in communist East Germany. The Western Allies also returned collections, including the Egyptian one, with the famous bust of Nefertiti, which found a new home in West Berlin.
We're still dealing with the consequences of the war, especially in trying to reunite the East and West collections. There are countless misattributions, no inventory books, no idea what some of the objects even are. For a long time, we weren't even sure if we could reconnect to the time before the war.
After the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and reunification, a plan was needed. The collections from East and West Berlin were to be brought together on the island. But in particular, the Neues Museum was in terrible condition. In 1999, Museum Island was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In the same year, a master plan was developed to restore and develop the museums, a massive undertaking spanning decades. Architect David Chipperfield was commissioned to restore the Neues Museum. The critical reconstruction preserved visible traces of history and war damage. With the James Simon Gallery, a new central entrance was created, modern but with stylised columns reminiscent of the 19th century.
So there is a certain conservatism and a certain continuation, a desire to continue rather than to disrupt. But the truth is that the 20th century has been incredibly disruptive for many people. And so I personally would have welcomed an intervention in terms of display that communicates this is a new era. This is a nation that is starting a new chapter in history, because it was an era of colonialism after all. And so why refer back to this era without a certain amount of skepticism?
The era of colonialism and archaeological expeditions as expressions of national power is over. Today, it's about global cooperation, provenance research and branding. The Louvre, the world's most visited art museum, has international branches, including one in Abu Dhabi. The British Museum has no foreign branches, but is a sought-after international partner for major exhibitions. Berlin's Museum Island is still searching for its path to position itself internationally and attract new audiences. Not easy when its centrepiece Pergamon Museum is closed for renovations until 2027. Still, the new president of the Prussian Cultural Heritage Foundation remains optimistic.
I hope even more artists will visit the collections, contributing, collaborating, creating important new works in dialogue with the old collections, and that through our promise of global partnerships, we become a key partner for many people from countries around the world.
Bringing the collections to the world and generating new energy through contemporary art is the new approach. But is it enough to engage more young and diverse people with ancient art and artifacts?
I think the most important task now is to include voices from the places where the original objects came from. Why not tell several histories about Nefertiti, for example, rather than just one? Why only have one museum label? You could have several and include different perspectives also on the question of why she's still there in the first place.
The fascinating stories behind the artworks could offer a compelling entry point. Because even after 200 years of the museum island, perspectives from the countries of origin are still missing. An honest look back to serve the future.